All right, everyone. New York may have just passed one of the most extreme abortion laws in the nation. But many of you were very, very concerned. You certainly wrote in and told me this. Very sad, indeed devastated over the extremist measures that the New York legislature took last week in the passing and signing of what is perhaps the single most permissive abortion law in the nation, in what they called the Reproductive Health Act. I mean, it's almost like a Brave New World in 1984 terminology. This Reproductive Health Act allows for the abortion of babies not just during late-term pregnancies, where the Supreme Court has actually said states do have a right to restrict abortions. No, as far as this law is concerned, you can abort all the way up to the very point of the child's birth. Up until birth, that child can be legitimately killed. It's now legal to kill a 7-pound baby in utero. That's how extreme this law is. That's what voting Democrat gets you. And just to put a punctuation mark on how dehumanizing this whole thing is, when the bill passed the Senate, the New York State Senate chamber burst into applause and celebration and laughter among radical feminists who packed the Senate chamber. It was standing room only, and their joy and their delight and their glee stemmed from their newfound freedom to kill a child at any stage of pregnancy. Now, I know a lot of you were alarmed by this, discouraged by it, devastated by this. It was by all accounts a horrifically extremist measure that was not just passed, but indeed celebrated without a single whimper from the mainstream corporatist globalist media. Nothing, right? Well, adulation, admiration, but no critique, no concern, because as far as the so-called mainstream media is concerned, the left cannot go too far. The left cannot be extreme. Those labels are reserved solely for the political right. You know, those horrible MAGA hat wearing Catholic students at the Right to Life March. They're the extremists. All right there, everyone. The Democratic governor of Virginia is caught endorsing infanticide. That's what we'll be talking about on today's video. You know, first it was New York, now it's Virginia. I'm sure many of you heard about the new bill that's being introduced in the Virginia legislature, where a Democrat delegate introduced what they're calling the Repeal Act, which would in effect repeal any and all measures that sought to limit abortion access. And as a result, again, like what we saw in New York, as a result, the so-called Repeal Act would in fact allow abortion up to the very moment of birth. In other words, if a woman is pregnant with a 7-pound baby and she begins showing signs at birth such as dilation, this legislation would, in fact, permit that child to be aborted, plain and simple. As David French over at National Review points out, the bill reduces the number of doctors required to certify the alleged medical need for an abortion from 3 doctors to 1, and this is crucial here. And it eliminates any objectively verified standard of what constitutes the birth being a danger to a woman's health. In other words, under this bill, virtually any claim of impairment on the part of the mother would be enough to warrant the killing of a 7-pound baby in utero. Anything would suffice. If the mother feels she's suffering from anxiety, depression, some kind of phobia, any and all of that are now legitimate reasons to take the life of a fully formed, completely viable living infant. This from David French's excellent analysis of the bill. Now, as if things couldn't get worse, then Virginia's Democratic Governor Ralph Northam, who said he's going to sign this monstrous bill into law, he went even further. In a radio interview the other day, he said that if a child, you know, the 7-pound baby in utero, if this child ended up surviving the abortion, he said, and these are his words, the infant would be kept comfortable and would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired, and then a discussion would ensue. Well, doesn't that sound so flipping rational? A discussion. A discussion, pray tell, about what? Well, needless to say, he's been called out on precisely what he had just advocated for all to hear. The governor of Virginia just advocated full-blown infanticide. Now, you should know he's not alone. What this bill is doing and what the governor advocated has been publicly advocated by some so-called medical ethicists for some time now. In the February of 2012 British Journal of Medical Ethics, they published an article that introduced a new term into the medical lexicon. The article was titled After Birth Abortion. That's the new term they coined. After birth abortion, why should the baby live? Now, as indicated by the title of the piece, the basic argument is that because there's no substantial difference between fetuses and newborns, then the termination, I'm quoting him here, should be permissible in all cases where abortion is, including cases where the newborn is not disabled. The article's authors, who were scholars from the University of Milan and the University of Melbourne, cite what's called the Groningen Protocol used in the Netherlands, which allows for the euthanizing of infants with a hopeless prognosis who experience what parents and medical experts deem to be unbearable suffering. For example, while recognizing that children with Down syndrome may in fact live otherwise very happy lives, the potential burden that such children might bring to a family or society means, quote, that when circumstances occur after birth such that they would have justified abortion before their birth, what we call after-birth abortion should be permissible, close quote. Now, fast forward to April 2018, and we meet a young boy named Alfie Evans. Alfie was a 20-month-old boy in Britain with a rare neurodegenerative disorder, and when the doctors concluded that there was nothing that they could do for him, they didn't recommend that Alfie be taken off life support. They insisted. And what was so unique in this situation was that when the hospital insisted that he be taken off life support, the rationale for such an insistence was citing this very Groningen protocol used by the Journal of Medical Ethics, but with one important difference. And I think you can tell what that difference was. The one important difference, a difference that this Journal of Medical Ethics article doesn't get into. The difference is the hospital removed Alfie from life support against his parents' wishes. And of course, when the court got involved, the court backed the wishes of the hospital, not the wishes of the parents, making it clear that it was the court that ultimately determines what is best for the child. Something, of course, very similar happened to the young boy Charlie Gard several months prior to Alfie. Now, there's two takeaways from all of this. First and foremost, this Virginia governor's comments alluding to a literal post-birth abortion where a living child removed from his mother's womb is now, under this bill, an appropriate subject for termination. These comments, this attitude, is in fact the logical outworking of modern abortion premises. Infanticide is a direct extension of the logic behind abortion. The Journal of Medical Ethics attests to this, calling these cases after-birth abortions. If there is no inherent difference biologically, chemically, or physically between when a child could be legally aborted and when a child couldn't, then either the logic of the conditions permitting abortion outweigh its prohibition, or it's the other way around. If there's no inherent difference biologically, chemically, or physically between when a child could or could not be aborted, then it's perfectly ethically permissible to argue that the conditions that prohibit abortion be applied backwards to when the child is in utero, which would in effect outlaw most abortions. You can't have it both ways, and that's what the Journal of Medical Ethics and this Virginia governor are in fact telling us. In fact, the pro-life activists have been saying that for 50 years. The very standards by which you justify the abortion of a 7-pound baby in utero can just as easily be applied to that 7-pound baby ex utero. So ironically, this governor and this bill under consideration are just taking the logic of abortion to its natural and horrific predictable ends. But it doesn't stop there. You really are a fool if you think that that's where it ends. Here's the second takeaway from all this. You'll notice that the fundamental ethical issue of abortion that has defined the debate thus far, which is whether a pregnant woman's interest in terminating an unwanted pregnancy can be rightly overruled by the government, you'll notice that with the cases of Alfie and Charlie, such a fundamental ethical issue is, for all practical purposes, gone. The case of Alfie and Charlie, which according to the Journal of Medical Ethics are legitimate extensions of the logic of abortion, have left behind and jettisoned the mother's role in the decision. These cases now demonstrate that the state can in fact step in and overrule a mother's desire to keep the baby. this is one of the most chilling trends in the whole abortion debate. Again, remember, philosophically speaking, the whole abortion debate historically has come down to whether a woman's desire to terminate an unwanted pregnancy could be overruled. And of course, here in the States, since Roe v. Wade, the answer to that question has been emphatic no. A woman now has the full unimpeded right to choose. And when we look back at the 2012 Journal of Medical Ethics, we find this whole notion still very much in place. Again, note what the authors of the article wrote. Post-birth abortion applies to infants with a hopeless prognosis who experience what parents and medical experts deem to be unbearable suffering. Right? Did you catch that? Doctors and parents. But now, do you see what's happening here in light of Alfie Evans and Charlie Gard? What's happening here is that the statement of the Journal of Medical Ethics would have to be changed to say what parents or medical experts deem to be unbearable suffering. And here's the irony in all of this. The very logic by which a woman was granted the right to choose is now being used to terminate a child's life even when the mother chooses differently. I'll say that again. The very logic by which a woman was granted the right to choose is now being used to terminate a child's life even when the mother chooses differently. Whereas the question was once whether society has a right to step in and overrule a woman's desire to terminate a pregnancy. Now the question is whether a parent has the right to overrule society's desire to terminate her child. Welcome to the world of modern globalist abortion.